Welcome to the Certificate in Occupational Stress Management. I'm Debbie Waller of Yorkshire Hypnotherapy Training, and this is the slideshow which supports Module 1, Introduction to Stress. This slideshow and the others in the series, along with the notes and workbook provided with the course, are copyright, and we'd appreciate it if you'd respect that and not share them with others without our permission. Stress is a term which is used in physics to indicate how much strain or weight something like this bridge can take before it collapses. The first person to use it about people was Walter Cannon in 1926. Cannon talked about a condition he called homeostasis, which means a perfect level of functioning, or balance. He believed that all living things tried to reach and maintain this balance, but that it could be disrupted by their environment or by ongoing biological processes. For example, a person's homeostatic balance could be disrupted by being too cold or by being hungry, and that the urge to get warmer or eat something was in fact an urge to restore homeostasis. At work, of course, the needs of the job sometimes have to take precedence over our own needs, so simply being at work can disrupt or prevent us achieving our homeostasis and be stressful in itself. The stress response can be triggered by a sudden or severe disruption to homeostasis, or sometimes even by our attempt to regain it, especially in situations of danger or when we feel the demands placed on us are more than we can cope with. The stress response is controlled by a large number of hormones and neurotransmitters or brain chemicals which are designed to help us cope better in moments of danger. It's operated by the autonomic nervous system, which is controlled by the medulla oblongata, here in the lower half of the brainstem. This affects all kinds of automatic functions, like breathing and heart rate. The autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic nervous system, which tends to increase the stress response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which tends to reduce it. Here's the amygdala, which is part of the brain which makes the decision about whether or not to set off the stress response, a kind of burglar alarm there in our heads. As you can see from the picture, there are actually two amygdalae. But as we're not training you to be brain surgeons, we're going to do what most authors in the stress field do and treat them as one. If the amygdala perceives a threat, it closes down the parts of the brain that deal with memory, language, decision-making, and other logical and rational thinking modes. It just wants us to react as quickly as possible and not to waste time in trying to plan. The amygdala then sends a message to the hypothalamus, which is round about here underneath the thalamus. The hypothalamus in turn triggers activity in the pituitary gland, which is here, just above the kidneys and the adrenal gland. These in turn produce stress hormones such as adrenaline, also sometimes called epinephrine, norepinephrine and cortisol. There's more information about these and their individual effects in your notes, but broadly they set in motion the stress response. Problems arise with stress because the stress response is only designed by nature to last a relatively short time. Modern stress can go on for days, weeks, even years. If this happens, the amygdala becomes hypersensitive, like a burglar alarm that goes off when someone just walks past the house instead of when they break in. At that point, situations that we wouldn't normally think of as stressful will set it off, and we suffer anxiety, panic attacks and so on, even when there doesn't appear to be a rational cause. You may have come across Selye's general adaptation syndrome before. He broke this process down into 3 basic steps. Stage 1 is alarm, when something upsets or endangers us. Our coping skills take a brief dip as we realise what's happening, and then the stress response kicks in. Our coping skills improve, and they help us to do well. Stage 2 is resistance. We are coping well here, and the stress response is helping us as it's designed to do. If the stress ends in this stage, the body goes back to normal with no harm done. If not, after a while we begin to cope less well. We enter the final phase, where the amygdala is hypersensitive and the body becomes exhausted. At this point, we're likely to experience serious physical or emotional collapse. Although the stress response is sometimes referred to as fight or flight syndrome, there are other responses it can bring about. Freeze is the first one, and you'll be aware of it from hedgehogs and rabbits and so on, which remain motionless when close to a predator. If your commonest predator hunts by sight or movement, it's a great technique. Of course, it's not so great when you're faced with oncoming traffic, but it's so effective in the situation that it's designed for that they're hardwired. They can't do anything else but freeze. In people, the freeze response can happen when neither fight nor flight seems helpful. At the extreme end, we see it on the battlefield, during rapes or muggings. More often in the therapy room, we see it in people with public speaking phobias, who seem to be incapable of speech or movement once they stand at the podium. Once in freeze mode, time often seems distorted, and we dissociate or remove ourselves emotionally from what's going on. After we unfreeze, we may have no conscious memories of the event. Faint has similar escapist benefits to freeze, but with one big drawback. If the opportunity to escape or fight back comes along and you're fainted, you can't take advantage of it, whereas you could always unfreeze. When our blood pressure drops, we bleed more slowly, and we're more likely to survive until help comes or the bleeding stops. In fight or flight mode, our blood pressure is high, and we'd bleed out quickly. We can link this to why people with blood phobias often faint at the sight of it, whilst people with other phobias such as spiders tend not to. And finally we have fidget, also sometimes called fooling around. This one happens when the energy from the stress response has no outlet, so we use it up in other ways, usually small unnecessary movements such as nail biting, hair twiddling or pulling, foot jogging, tapping, doodling and so on. Or we may try to use humour to turn away our feelings. These behaviours are often referred to as displacement activities because they're displacing the original stress, and they're often mentioned by clients presenting with anxiety. Something like nail biting or hair pulling might actually be the presenting issue. Thank you for listening. Now please return to your course notes. Don't forget to complete the exercises on this material in the workbook before you begin Module 2.